I really think he is going to weigh in on AI. What that's going to look like is very hostile to AI insofar as it takes work from workers.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Connor Lewis is president of the Seven Mountains AFL-CIO. He won the presidency of his labor council by campaigning on a promise of getting an 8th mountain. This is in central Pennsylvania, in Center, Mifflin, Huntingdon, and
we're going to hold him to that.
Oneida counties. Yeah,
we take such promises very seriously on the Valley Labor Report. We hold our candidates accountable. So yeah,
where are we at on the 8th mountain, Connor?
We're working on the project labor agreement for it.
Okay.
You know, we're insisting that it all be done with union labor. So we're just talking to the Building Trades Council, trying to get everything set up. But there's even talks about a 9th mountain at this point. So we're doing pretty well.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. We're going to get a 9th mountain in central Pennsylvania. So we're looking forward to that, and looking forward to it being the 8th and 9th mountains being union built. So Connor, I got you on because you are a TikToker under the name Union Dad, isn't that right? Union Dad on TikTok, and also a Catholic. And so you've been doing Pope talk recently, and you had some good videos about the new Pope, I thought. And as somebody who is not a Catholic but whose in-laws are Catholic, and I'm actually going to Mass for the first time in a long time tomorrow, not partaking in the Eucharist, obviously, since I'm not Catholic. Anyway, so looking forward to that. But I've been hearing a lot about the Pope, and been hearing some good things and bad things about the Pope, and you've had some really good videos on TikTok about maybe what to expect from the new Pope, and kind of positioning his election as Pope in the kind of context of the Catholic Church. But like one of the things that is more concerning that is that Michael Knowles, for example, is really excited about this new Pope. Michael Knowles of Daily Wire fame. And Michael Knowles actually, before the Pope was elected, was asking his audience, what regnal name would you like for the Pope to take? I'm hoping for Leo the 14th.
Before the Pope was announced, I said that I was hoping for the Pope to take the regnal name. Popes take a new name. They're not their birth name anymore. They pick, John Paul or Francis. Or I said I was hoping for Leo the 14th. And then a little while later, the Pope came out and announced in Latin that he had picked Leo the 14th.
So I hear that, and that was a tweet before before he was elected. And so I was like, oh wow, maybe this isn't good. But there's also reasons to think that maybe it's fine. Maybe it will be good. Maybe he'll be a good Pope. So I guess, what are the first things for non-Catholics or for Catholics that don't kind of follow the church super closely? What are some of the first things that you think is important for people to know about the new Pope, about the name Leo, and about the relevance of him coming after Pope Francis?
So I think one of the most important things for people to know up front is that it's hard to talk about, as much as it often happens, it's hard to talk about the Catholic Church in terms of kind of progressive versus conservative, because there are a lot of different things that map very differently in the Catholic Church. And even the progressive, quote unquote, progressive cardinals, bishops, et cetera, people like Francis, are not going to align neatly with, political progressives in the United States. Even though Francis was known for being more welcoming toward LGBTQ plus, Catholics and that kind of thing, there was still not a world where Francis was going to, fully endorse, the right of marriage for, same-sex couples or something like that. Like, that just wasn't going to happen. And on the flip side, even though Benedict XVI was known as rightly as a conservative pope, he had a lot of critiques of capitalism as well that would not map on to, the American political right. It does map a little bit onto American cardinals specifically, and American Catholics specifically, but we've always been a weird outlier in the Catholic Church. I wouldn't take that to mean anything about the church more generally. And American Catholics make up about 1.6% of global Catholics. So, as much as we love to be the main character, we're really not. I keep thinking a lot of Americans, especially because the new pope is an American, want to make it about America. And I keep thinking of like the Mad Men theme of the Don Draper, like, I don't even think about you kind of thing. Like, that's kind of the Catholic Church toward the US, like we're not the main character. We're not the biggest thing on their mind. But I think the way that I look at him is that he was a compromise candidate. All the things seem to indicate that he was a compromise candidate. And things do kind of hit the press about how the conclave went after the conclave, a little bit at least. And it sounds like he was kind of the really core pro-Francis crowd, allegedly, and this is all allegedly because, nothing is ever going to be quoted about this, allegedly didn't have the votes to get through one of their preferred candidates, one of the people that is like staunchly in the tradition of Francis and, is both in style as well as substance in everything. And so Prevost was their last ditch effort to get someone that was acceptable and generally within the vein of Francis, but that could get votes from enough of the cardinals to get through. And so I think it's really hard to say exactly what direction that he's going to go, but it's been weird because, you see a lot of liberal Catholics celebrating this. And you see a lot of really conservative Catholics celebrating this. And you even see, even some of the outright traditionalist Catholics that are not upset, at least not yet. So it's like, it's very interesting that everyone seems to kind of be reading some kind of hopeful expectations into him. And then, I think that there are a fair number of people that are very wait and see on it. So it's really interesting, he is a very difficult cardinal to actually kind of nail down. And it doesn't help that he picked a name that is one of the most consequential and very complicated popes since the Reformation. And so like that just complicates it in even because you can read so much into that pick.
Right. Yeah, tell me about Leo the 13th. Like what are some of the complications? Because one of the reasons that Michael Knowles was so excited about the Leo the 14th is that he said, and I don't know, but he said that Leo the 13th was like super anti-communism and anti-socialism, and then in passing, Knowles kind of did admit he was also critical sort of capitalism, but he was much more hardline against communism. And so that's the thing that he was really known for. But then I hear people kind of on the other side, quote unquote, that say that Leo the 13th was the workers' pope. And he was known for Rero Novarum, which I haven't read, but is that they say that was kind of critical of both communism and capitalism, but they say was more critical of capitalism and put workers more at the center, and is kind of the father of Catholic social teaching. So how do you understand Leo the 13th's legacy, and also why should we take it for granted that Leo the 13th is who he would be calling back to rather than Leo the 12th or the 1st or the 3rd or whatever?
So there's been some reporting post-conclave that, and I can't remember the specific cardinal, but that a cardinal had breakfast with the new pope and asked him, why he picked that name. And he did acknowledge that it was Leo the 13th. I think the context of why Rerum Novarum was released, the term is promulgated, but was released, which is basically like a circular letter that goes to all of the Catholic hierarchy, at least at that time. Since like the 1950s or so, it's been addressed to the faithful as well. And a really important shift is that now these days, most encyclicals that are addressing wider social issues are addressed to all people of goodwill, whether or not they're Catholic. The reason it came to be is because it was first released in 1891, and consider the kind of position that the Catholic Church was in. Honest to God, a lot of the Catholic Church was still running scared of the French Revolution. They were running scared of the rise of kind of mass European democracy, of, the sweeping away kind of the old divine right model of rule. They didn't like it. They were terrified of it because they were getting swept away in a lot of respects along with, the divine right of European monarchs. And on top of that, just about 21 years prior, the Kingdom of Italy unified and took all of the papal states away from the Catholic Church. So because until 1870, the Catholic Church, or specifically the Pope, had directly ruled over a good chunk of like the middle of Italy. And they were reduced to just within the walls of the Vatican. And they still maintained that, that's our territory. And they were basically it was referred to as the captive papacy until the 1930s. And so they feel under threat by the world changing around them. You have the rise of industrial capitalism. Everything is changing incredibly rapidly. Marx said everything that's solid turns to air. That was the 19th century. And so Leo XIII was the first pope that kind of just took actually read the room and decided we need to be present in all of this. We need to figure out how we relate to all of this instead of sticking our heads in the sand. And the biggest issue at the time was, the urban working class and, the impact of industrial capitalism. And so I think it's wrong to paint him as anti-communist, partially because communism was not a significant political force in the 1890s yet. And it's more that he was trying to say that both of these are the wrong direction, and there's a third Catholic way to deal with, the modern world. And so it wasn't anti those so much as it was trying to set out like, this is the Catholic answer. And that's where a lot of Christian democratic parties in Europe eventually came from. Rerum Novarum, the thing that's important to understand about Rerum Novarum is it was generally pro-worker. But the biggest thing is that the bishops had no idea what to do with it. This wasn't what theology was about in their minds. Theology was about, talking about Marian devotion and, kind of more less earthly. They were talking about spiritual matters, not earthly matters. And so they had no idea what to do with it. And there was no additional anything written by the papacy on Catholic social teaching for another 40 years. And so everything that developed after it was really done from kind of the bottom up, with a lot of clergy like John A. Ryan in the United States that were very interested in this, that were embedded in working class communities and were like, this is something we can work with. And it was still undefined enough that they kind of took it and just kind of did what they needed to do with it. And for a long time, they didn't get that much scrutiny from like the church, which normally, all theological writing goes through censors. And so I really think it's a misrepresentation to really portray him as either, on the left or the right, because his entire point was both of those are wrong. Here's the Catholic solution, because he was trying to put the Catholic Church back in the center of modern life and was in a lot of ways successful.
Hey, 5 seconds, just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
And And I think that's a good leeway to kind of bring us back to the present and help us understand in what ways Leo XIV is a compromise candidate between the Francis faction and the more maybe traditionalist faction. And one of the things that you said in one of your interviews that I thought was interesting is that a lot of the traditionalists, in your view, like so much of their concern with the direction that Francis was taking the church was about aesthetics, and so much of the traditionalist concern since Vatican II has been about aesthetics, actually, maybe even more so than Catholic social teaching or whatever. Explain to us like what the divides are within the church, and maybe how this cardinal, now Pope Leo XIV, was able to kind of be the bridge between them.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the more traditionalist wing of the Catholic Church is super concerned with aesthetics. And that's not to be dismissive, because I think that there's a legitimate kind of tradition that they're kind of working in, because a lot of the Catholic response to the Reformation was about aesthetics. It was about like grand, like impressing the kind of weight and majesty of the church on everyone through, kind of the aesthetic awe and spectacle of, the mass, of churches, of artwork, everything. So, and Francis was very unconcerned with aesthetics in the same way. And in fact, if anything, he opted towards simplicity. And he came from like a Latin American tradition that viewed those kind of grand aesthetics as kind of creating a distance between them and the people. And so was very concerned with like dialing that down. And so that was honestly one of the biggest things that honestly triggered the traditionalist faction, is that he was so unconcerned and even opposed to kind of the big aesthetics that Benedict XVI was huge on. And there's every indication that Prevost is more, or, Leo XIV is much more sympathetic to a more traditional view. Like even the regalia that he came out with when he was announced as Pope, like instead of wearing like a simple white cassock like Francis did, he wore the same regalia that John Paul II and Benedict XVI did. So, and there is at least some early indication that there might be, and this is again all reading tea leaves, it's only been a couple of days, but there is some early indication that there may be a little bit of relaxing on the use of the Latin Mass, which would be a huge thing for traditionalists, and doesn't necessarily get super into like the more ideological kind of social stuff. It does and it doesn't, but I think that him being more open to that point of view, where Francis took a very hard line, is probably a big part of what made him a more attractive candidate to the more conservative faction of the College of Cardinals. And I think that may have made him a more appealing candidate to a lot of people, because there's been a lot of, very nasty infighting at the highest levels in the Catholic Church over the past over a decade. And I would imagine that there are a lot of cardinals, even ones that are sympathetic to Pope Francis, that are just like, we need a break from this. Like it's been nasty. And I'm sure that they're like, look, a lot of things are changing. We just need to, bury the hatchet for a while and sort this out. So I think that honestly, like he was viewed as kind of a bridge builder, and probably in some important respects, a middle of the road candidate that could, keep the more conservative cardinals happy.
And just to the Latin Mass, can you explain what that argument is about between kind of the traditionalists and the non-traditionalists in the church, and maybe even why different people care so much about it? Because it seems like if I were Catholic, I would be like, okay, if some people want to do a Latin Mass, they can do that, and if other people want to do a Mass in their own language, which frankly seems like, which I don't know why people are so hung up on the Latin Mass, but like if people want to do it, I don't know why I would stop them as somebody who's wouldn't want to go to a Latin mass. But yeah, what is even that argument about?
A lot of it goes back to the Second Vatican Council, and I will say that in a lot of different places there has been mass celebrated in the local language for a long time, like in Coptic Catholicism or Eastern Rite Catholicism. So it's really just kind of like the main mass of the Catholic Church that they're fighting over, because there have been regional variations for centuries and centuries. A lot of it really is that the Second Vatican Council took a look at the Tridentine Rite and viewed it as creating a distance from the clergy and the faithful in a way that was not healthy for the church. And if you go to it, I have been to, a Latin Mass twice, and they're correct. I mean, it does. Like, a lot of it is really creating visually and just in the celebration of it, like a big distance from the priest. Like the faithful are kind of passive observers to the Mass rather than active participants in the Mass. And so that's kind of the core of it, and why, the reforms even happened. Where it gets tricky is that, a lot of more conservative-minded Catholics will say that it went too far, that, that the new Mass is undignified, you have guitars and stuff that were basically becoming Protestants, like that kind of thing. Whereas you hear from more kind of like pro-Vatican II kind of Catholics that, no, like, we're meeting people where they're at. And it's important for us to do that. And, there's a really broad range and spectrum, because even like there is how Mass is celebrated, you can do like a very kind of aesthetically conservative Vatican II, like New Rite Mass, or you can do one that is much more kind of like informal and has like guitars and a band or whatever the hell you want. Like there is a lot of flexibility, but that really is a lot of it, is that, and I mean, the Mass is central to Catholicism. And so arguments over how the Mass, I mean, there's a lot of weight invested in how do we do this, because this is the central part of the Catholic Church.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. So as we're wrapping up then, I guess, what are your predictions for how this Pope will relate to, working people and labor? What should unions expect from this Pope?
I think that he's going to be labor friendly. I mean, that is kind of the official kind of position of the Catholic Church. And I think it's reasonable to think that he may pay more attention to those issues than most popes. One thing that I think is very important to keep an eye on, and that I'm very, very convinced that this is going to be a big part of his papacy and that is very relevant to labor, is artificial intelligence. And one of the things that he said in some news reports, it was reported that he viewed the importance of Leo XIV because he views like the changes with AI and all these new things as comparable to the Industrial Revolution, that these are massive changes that are occurring in our society and that we need to be present, as a church. His view is that we as the Catholic Church need to be present in these discussions. And so I really think that he is going to weigh in on AI, and I would imagine that what that's going to look like is very skeptical of AI, very hostile to AI insofar as it takes work from workers, and probably very focused on, human dignity and how AI may be a threat to human dignity. So I expect the Catholic Church under Leo XIV to come out very skeptical and even overtly hostile to AI, and a lot of it is going to be on labor grounds.
All right. Well, there we go. Connor Lewis, union member of the News Guild, and president of the Seven Mountains Labor Council in Pennsylvania. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Yep. You can find him at Union Dad on TikTok. He's not even I don't think he has children. I don't know why I think that's like stolen valor or something. As a union dad, Adam, do you feel stolen valor from Connor?
I thought Connor had kids.
Does he have kids? I don't know. I didn't. Maybe he does.
I am a union dad. So yeah. But appreciate Connor and all he does. And it's interesting that we talk about the Catholic Church 2 weeks in a row. Last week we had the Catholic Labor Network on, and so it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out. I know there's already been some discussion among some critics about this new pope's role in the child abuse scandals, both here in the United States and in Peru, where he was located for some time. So, it's going to be interesting to see, especially as y'all described, where basically all sides seem to be expecting something, right? Not everyone's going to get everything they're looking for, clearly. So
yeah, who's going to lose out?
Right. So we'll find out for sure.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.